Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York. I'd like you to respond to that first. You heard Rachel talking with Caddy a little bit about government shutdowns and how they don't really ultimately benefit either party or the one who's in charge. But what's your response to what Republicans are saying right now about this shutdown? Because they're not following all these different conversations about the politics and who's lying. Yeah. They just know the government's shut down. And to your citizens, what do you say?
Look, Democrats are fighting for the health care of the American people. I mean, Democrats are largely in Washington, D.C., intent on reopening the government and protecting the health care of the American people, whereas Republicans are essentially on vacation and have been content to let the government shut down and let millions of people either lose their health care or see their health care costs spiral out of control. So that's the fundamental contrast. And Republicans, you know, the party that has the power ultimately bears the responsibility. The Republican Party controls the White House, the Senate, and the House, and therefore bears ultimate responsibility for the shutdown.
So if Democrats were to give in to the shutdown, what would happen? And to get the government open again?
Well, what is at stake is not only the government, but our healthcare system is in danger of falling off a cliff. There are 4 million people who are at grave risk of losing their health insurance, 24 million people who are at risk of seeing their premiums rise by as much as 75%. Hospitals, who are often the largest employers in both urban and rural America, are going to see $20 billion in losses. That's a massive destabilization of our healthcare system that Democrats simply cannot accept.
So healthcare, obviously a big part of this, but the White House also making no secret that they plan to take advantage of the shutdown to do some things that they want to do. Mass firings, potentially permanent, unlike furloughs, which is usually what happens in the shutdown. And then we saw the memo from OMB Director Russ Vought yesterday targeting funding for states that Vice President Harris won in last year's election, and talked to us in particular about the impact on New York, where $18 billion worth of projects being canceled.
Wait, Donald Trump has been weaponizing government against his political enemies, engaging in mass firings and funding freezes long before a government shutdown. Like, he's never needed a government shutdown to act like an authoritarian. All we're asking is for the Trump administration and Republicans could come to the table and negotiate a bipartisan compromise that could reopen the government and keep health care affordable. Instead, he's acting like a mobster. He's telling federal employees, that's a nice job you have there. It would be a shame if something had to happen to it. He's saying the same about Gateway and the 2nd Avenue subway. That is not the behavior of a president. That's the behavior of a mobster. We want a negotiation, not extortion, and we refuse to be extorted.
Congressman, the back and forth between the administration and the Democrats in defense of what's going on and explanations of what's going on, they seem to many people's ears to miss a larger point. When you go to LaGuardia to fly back to Washington, you'll go with your paycheck. The TSA people who secure the place have no paycheck. We live in a paycheck-to-paycheck country. If you miss 1 week of pay in your paycheck-to-paycheck country, it'll take you a month at least to catch up economically. You never hear the working people who are missing a paycheck or the military members who are missing a paycheck talked about in this back and forth. What is wrong with the Democrats' messaging?
I feel like we have the right messaging, because the cost that is crushing working families in America is the price of health care. It's the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. It's spiraling out of control. And I'm not aware of a working person who can afford to absorb a 75% spike in health care premiums. And I represent the Bronx, which is one of the poorest congressional districts in America. I have thousands of constituents who need those ACA tax credits. And keep in mind, the Republicans have been engaged in what is a 15-year effort to essentially repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Let me just give you a sense of how Americans are viewing this shutdown. A new Washington Post poll finds that significantly more Americans blame President Trump and congressional Republicans than Democrats, 47 to 30%. It's worth noting that 23% say they're not sure who to assign blame to. Among independents, 50% blame Trump and the GOP, 22% fault Democrats, and 29% are not sure. The poll also finds 2/3 very or somewhat concerned about the shutdown, while 34% are not to or not at all concern. John Hellman, I just want to get your read on those numbers.
I think those numbers tell you that the messaging, the battle of over how to perceive this shutdown is still at very early days. But we're, this is very much to play for. And I think, we've been talking about the messaging question. The question I have is about kind of political, about political consistency and unity in the Democratic Party. As you know, the last time this came around, there was a question about a shutdown. There was a lot of division among Democrats, ended up a lot of anger among those directed at Chuck Schumer for having kept the government open. This time the Democrats stayed together and hung together, and although a few Senate Democrats, John Fetterman and others, 3 of them, peeled off and voted with Republicans. How long do you think the unity that's necessary underneath the messaging to stay together, how long do you think that unity will hold?
Well, look, I know with certainty that House Democrats are united. I hope the same for Senate Democrats. But if we're not willing to fight for the health care of the American people, if we're not willing to fight for the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, then what are we here for?
Right.
Like, we have a simple choice as Democrats. We can either stand by passively and do nothing, or we can fight for the health care of the American people. And our voters, our constituents, expect us to fight for a more affordable cost of living.
Okay, so you say as Democrats you refuse to be exhorted. I can respect that. But Democrats also need to win in the next elections. And I'm curious, what's the political gain that Democrats get out of this situation as it stands right now? You're dealing with a party that wants to fire and cut.
We have a healthcare system that is in danger of falling off a cliff, right? 24 million people could see a premium spike. We have no choice but to leverage every opportunity that we have to prevent a destabilization of our healthcare system. And if we're able to do so, that's a win for the American people.
So, Congressman, while we have you, we want to talk to you about other topics. You have long been a staunch supporter of Israel, particularly since what happened on October 7th, 2023. But we've had some polling we've just been discussing this week that shows that American support for Israel has dramatically declined in recent months. You can see the numbers here. Only 19% now strongly support Israel, while 35% strongly oppose. This cuts across party lines. I want to get your sense as to why you think this is happening and what risk is Israel doing for itself in the views of the world, but now here in the United States as well, in light of its conduct in Gaza.
Well, the simple explanation is the war, and there should be a consensus that we secure the release of the hostages, end the war, which has persisted for far too long, and focus on building broader Israeli-Arab peace in the Middle East. I'm cautiously optimistic that the future of the Middle East belongs to the Abraham Accords, belongs to Israeli-Arab peace. But the war has taken a toll on Palestinians, on Israelis. There's overwhelming war fatigue. There's been deep suffering. And it's, wars in the Middle East have a long history of becoming quagmires that have no end in sight.
We wanted also more of a local matter. In the Bronx yesterday, there was a building collapse. Terrible footage and tragedy. Talk to us about what that means, not just this incident, you can see pictures here, but just about this nation's, and particularly its city's decaying infrastructure, and frankly, the impact of withholding funding, state, in this case, federal, what that could mean.
Well, keep in mind, it was Mitchell Houses in the Bronx, which is a public housing development. It's federal housing. And Mitchell Houses is home to over 3,000 families. That particular building, more than 300 families. It is nothing short of a miracle that there were no fatalities or injuries. Like, a partial collapse easily could have been a mass casualty event. And there's been federal defunding, and we are seeing the consequences. The collapse of a building in Mitchell Houses is not an accident. It's a consequence of federal disinvestment from public housing.
So, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York, thank you very much for coming in this morning. And Rachel Bade, before you go, as you watch this,